He promised he'd never hurt me, so I promised I'd never forget. The day she whispered the lie, I felt the ground shift beneath me. I wasn't ready for the revelation. Betrayal exploded like a fragile glass vase shattering on cold tile. I stood, frozen, reality raining down around me, the echoes of her promise replaying in my mind like a twisted lullaby. She believed I would confront her, unleash my fury. But the truth nestled deeper into my bones. Silence was my weapon, the calm before my storm. The pretense of reconciliation became my facade. I nodded, parroted empty words, while inside the gears began to turn. Pain morphed into purpose. Each detail crystallized in my memory. Late nights, evasive smiles, glares in mirrors that knew her secrets. I cataloged the lies, turning heartache into a ledger of justice. With every heartbeat, clarity washed over me, sharpening my focus. I would disappear from her world, quietly erasing history, while she spun her deceitful web. No longer a target of her betrayal, I stepped outside her narrative. Now I was the shadow in her light, waiting, watching, and patiently plotting. My revenge rooted in the silence she failed to notice. In this quiet, I reclaimed my strength. I walked away, swallowing the din of chaos behind me, not with anger, but with a chilling resolve. The silence weighed heavy in the air, shimmering like heat off asphalt, the echoes of her lies fading into the distance. Confrontation would give her power. I wouldn't grant her that satisfaction. Every step I took was steeped in intention, a quiet exit crafted from the ashes of anguish she had ignited. I sensed her eyes on me, searching for a reaction, a crack in my calm facade that never came. I had chosen silence. I had chosen control. It unsettled her, stirred uncertainty in her delusions of bliss. Pain became data, meticulous entries of her deceit, carefully catalogued in the vault of my memory. Late nights, whispers on the phone, a shadow of intimacy tarnished by betrayal. I watched her lay the guilt on thick, an actress in her own tragic play, unknowing that I was jotting down each lie, each manipulated moment. Power was in observation. I calculated. I planned. The emotional fog that clouded my judgment began to lift, revealing stark clarity. No more running on the jagged edges of hurt. I was a ghost in her narrative, lurking just outside her curtain call, taking notes, calculating my next move. In my newfound silence, I found strength, a meticulous focus. The world around her swirled in falsehood while I remained an immovable sentinel, ready to shape her reckoning piece by piece in a surgical precision that echoed the very calm she thought I had lost. Time became a canvas, each stroke meticulously crafted with the paint of her lies. Days turned into nights, and I mapped the time between her late meetings and elusive text messages, each interaction a thread in the intricate tapestry of betrayal. I replayed the scenes, shedding light on the darkness she cloaked around us. It was all data now, compiled in the depths of my mind. I took a moment before each step, each choice. Shadows. I became a master of invisibility, lurking in plain sight. Friends whispered their confessions of guilt, their regrets, and in the churning silence, I became a confidant, and a confidant alone. A man scorned should be loud, but I was crafting a quiet symphony of revenge. I began to cut ties, removing what she held dear, one calculated severance at a time. Withdrawals became shadows of my actions, her financial landscape strewn with whispers of my maneuvering. I readied my tools, each one selected not for violence, but for the sharp, keen edge of exposure. Identification of every lie she spun became my blueprint. Her gaslighting made concrete by numbers, timestamps, names. I waited in the corners of her happiness, hidden from her view. She pranced, oblivious to the storm I was conjuring. Every detail sharpened my focus. Revenge would not require a vile outburst, but a quiet precision. I would rewrite her narrative and light the match that burned her world. I was the ghost, watching with silent strength, preparing for the day she would finally slip, unwittingly unraveling the life she had woven through deception. My breath was steady, a calm in the chaos I now controlled. In every passing moment, I found satisfaction. My plan was in motion, invisible yet undeniable. I erased my presence, pixel by pixel, from her world. A few keystrokes, a couple of signatures, and I was gone, lost in the shadows I had so carefully cultivated. The bank transfers, the account closures, all executed with a surgical precision that felt intoxicating. She had wrapped herself in a cocoon of laughter and false happiness, oblivious to the hollowing out of her reality. Each withdrawal felt like a silent victory. I relished the notion that she believed everything was okay, that her lies had woven a perfect tapestry. I watched as her new life spun around me, her new man, a replacement just as grotesque as her betrayal. She was too distracted by the illusion she was building, brick by brick, forever blind to the cracks that I was creating. In this clarity, I felt the fog lift. The chaos of emotion receded, leaving a sharp focus on my design. A ghost haunting the periphery of her scripted life, savoring the anticipation of her collapse. Standing on the edge of her orchestrated facade, I was no longer the man she promised not to hurt. I was the architect of her undoing, waiting for the moment her illusion crumbled under its own weight. I had learned the art of patience, each calculated move drawing me closer to the inevitable. The pieces were in place, and she remained blissfully ignorant, the perfect dancer in a dark play, while I took on the role of the unseen observer. The silence she couldn't fathom was growing louder, each heartbeat a reminder that her time was running short. I crafted my persona with care, a mask of cordiality that felt like silk against my skin. In public, I waved warmly, greeted her with smiles that felt more like blades than gestures. I even sent her flowers on her birthday, a gesture wrapped in layers of irony. Each bloom whispered my contempt, but to her, they delivered the facade of forgiveness. She basked in the light of her false narrative, believing I had moved on, that I had accepted her betrayal as a footnote in our shared history. But she had no inkling of the web I was weaving, the intricate trap I had laid around her so carefully. Her laughter, once a source of joy, grew increasingly hollow, a mockery echoing in my ears. The more I played the part of the dutiful ex, the more her guard slipped. She saw strength as weakness and became oblivious to the predator lurking just beyond her reach. Every laugh shared with friends, every intimate moment she faked with her new man, deepened my resolve. In her arrogance, she didn't see me, the invisible hand orchestrating the theater of her downfall. I reveled in the thrill of misdirection. She thought I was a ghost, but I was merely waiting for the right moment to strike. Remembering the glimmer of satisfaction in controlling her image became my resolve. I sharpened the blade of my silence, letting it lay still till I was ready to slice through her carefully constructed illusions. Each day brought me closer to clarity, the truth solidifying in my mind. Her unmasking would be as quiet as my grief had been loud. She wouldn't hear the storm coming. She wouldn't see the ground shift beneath her feet until it was too late. I slid deeper into the shadows, carefully amassing every piece of evidence against her. Financial discrepancies piled like autumn leaves, unauthorized purchases, hidden accounts, an intricate ballet of deceit. Each night, the glow of the screen illuminated my resolve, burning the fabric of her treachery into my mind like a brand. I was relentless, a surgeon carving away at the rot. Then doubt crept in, sleek as a whisper. The mention of an audit floated from a friend's lips, an ominous cloud trailing through my thoughts. Had someone noticed too much? Had I overlooked a crucial detail? Panic was an uninvited guest, but I would not show weakness. My heart was a drumbeat, steady, reminding me of the precision I had cultivated. I recalibrated. Every move now had to be sharper, more deliberate. A misstep would cripple my plans, but retreat was not an option. I pushed forward, the blade of my revenge glinting, still hidden, but now with a renewed urgency. I stepped back to observe her, a specter hovering on the edge of her happiness. But the margins of her grin began to fray. Her facade wavered with each phone call I listened to, each fabricated interaction I scrutinized. Watching her navigate her new life, I felt a mixture of satisfaction and the thrill of the chase. Truth was a currency, and I was its master. It would only be a matter of time before the weight of her lies would draw her under. I needed to maintain my steadiness, to let the storm gather while I stood as a calm eye among chaos. Mistakes would no longer be an option. I redoubled my efforts, pouring my resolve into my unyielding focus, fine-tuning my strategy. She would be undone, not by rage but by the quiet precision of my intentions. My breath steadied, each inhalation a vow, a reminder that every microcosm of control was shaped by my unwavering silence. In this shadowy dance of vengeance, I remained unseen, but the world around her was beginning to conspire against the illusion, and for that, I would prepare meticulously. I orchestrated the moment her world flipped, an unseen hand guiding her towards the precipice. An anonymous tip whispered into the bureaucratic ear of her employer, an imperceptible pebble cast into the placid waters of her carefully staged life. I felt the vibrations of my action ripple through the silence I had cultivated, each edge sharp against her oblivion. The audit came as a shockwave, unexpected, brutal, ripping through her carefully constructed illusions. I watched from the shadows, the corners of my lips curling ever so slightly. Her facade began to fracture. I could see the cracks spiderwebbing across her once pristine image, each fracture echoing my quiet satisfaction. She thought she was safe, floating in the buoyancy of her deceit, but all it took was a single nudge to send her into a spiral. The whispers started, creeping into her ears, peeling away layers of her confidence. Colleagues who once praised her now looked through her like a pane of glass, doubt casting shadows over her every interaction. She would pace her office like a lion trapped in a cage, unaware of the predator lurking just outside, waiting for her to stumble. I felt no vindictiveness. This was simply justice manifesting in the decimation of her shiny veneer. The storm I had set in motion was not an act of rage. It was a testament to my restraint, to the precision with which I had orchestrated my return to power. I didn't need her to see me win. Her chaos was my victory. The silence I left behind spoke louder than any confrontation ever could. I had woven my revenge into the very fabric of her despair. Her lover, the shadow of my betrayal, vanished into thin air, perhaps sensing the tremors of her unraveling. She would be left alone to navigate the ruins of her choices, a marionette with severed strings. intrinsically aware that something fundamental had shifted, yet clueless as to who had wielded the blade. Each ripple in her world became a note in my symphony, a melody of retribution played with the utmost care. In the panorama of her demise, I didn't feel the weight of a victim, but the lightness of a master architect, stepping back to observe the chaos that would inevitably consume her. Control had returned to my hands, slowly squeezing the remnants of her defiance until the final chords of my vindication rang clear in the stillness of her unraveling. I watched as the facade she had spun began to unravel, thread by thread, each pull a subtle reminder of her systemic destruction. Friends turned to strangers, their sympathies waning as the veil of her lies faded in the harsh light of scrutiny. She reached out to them, begging for rescue, for understanding, a drowning woman grasping at the straws of her own creation. The world, however, was no longer buying her act. Messages flooded through my screen, whispers of confusion from those who once admired her. "What happened?" they asked, with a hint of pity thickening the air. I relished the power simmering just beneath my calm exterior. "We change," I replied, my words dripping with the weight of my silence. I felt their eyes glaze over, their concern deflating against the stark reality of her downfall. All around her, the storm boiled, an impending tempest she could not perceive. Panic began to etch lines across her brow, her laughter now strained, her smiles brittle. I had unspooled her tightly wound narrative, the plot thickening with each soul crushed beneath her ambitions. Where once she stood triumphant, she now teetered, uncertain and lost. Ah, the beauty of it! The grand unveiling of her true self, the unmasking of the woman she thought she could bury beneath layers of charm and compassion. No longer the goddess in the spotlight, she was stripped down to the core of her deceit, raw and exposed. The silence I had woven around her was suffocating, yet she remained blissfully ignorant of the hand that orchestrated her downfall from the shadows. And in the aftermath, I felt it, the weight of obligation drop away. I wasn't simply enacting revenge. I was restoring balance to a world she had tipped into chaos. No shouts needed, no violent confrontations, just the exactness of consequence, a quiet resurgence of order from the remnants of her misdeeds. I readied myself, an unyielding sentinel, watching her burn in the hell of her own making. The blade danced above her throat, poised perfectly for the final cut. The moment she realized she had lost everything because I hadn't forgotten. I agreed to the meeting, though it felt like a final brushstroke on a canvas, one that had been drenched in her deception for too long. She wanted closure, and I was the artist preparing for the last act. Her request was merely smoke, obscuring the fire beneath. Her nervous laughter fell flat, a discordant note in the symphony of our shared past. "I'm glad we can talk," she said, the words trembling on her lips like leaves caught in the wind. I remained silent, observing the careful choreography of her remorse, how she twisted in the chair, dancing on the knife's edge of her shame. This silence was contingent, my calm deliberate. "What's wrong with you? Why are you so calm?" She needed a reaction, desperate for validation in the wreckage of her turmoil. I lifted my gaze slowly, locking my eyes onto hers, letting the weight of my silence settle between us. "Because I didn't forget," I said, my voice low and measured, wrapping each syllable in icy clarity. Her facade flickered. The actress caught mid-performance, the curtain rising to reveal the frayed edges of her work. In that moment, I didn't need to forgive. The twisted whirls of yesterday's pain hung heavy in the air, an unasked question she couldn't bear to acknowledge. The quiet in me roared. It bordered on symphonic, just as it had since that fateful day when trust shattered like fragile glass converging on the cold tile. I leaned back, allowing her squirming uncertainty to wash over us both. No anger, just a calculated immobilization of her resilient facade, feeding off her mounting panic. I was the shadow in her light, watching as she tumbled deeper into the darkness of consequences, all while one thing remained unchanged. I promised I'd never forget. Silence has its own rhythm, and I let it play, my breath steady against the backdrop of her unraveling. I stared at the photo one last time, the last remnant of a life that had turned to ash. A moment in time where I had believed in us. How beautiful, how naive. Yet it felt too heavy now, so I clicked delete. The screen flashed, the image vanished, and with it, the final tether to a version of myself that lingered in her shadows. As the pixels disappeared, I felt the last traces of her grip slipping away, each flicker a breath of freedom. Therapy concluded with the simple phrase, "You're ready." Mentally, I had dismissed the past, burying it like an unmarked grave. I had unraveled myself from her web, dismantling every shared account, erasing all traces of our intertwined lives. It wasn't about forgiveness, it was about liberation. She had asked for closure, but closure was a luxury reserved for those still shackled by the chains of hurt. I had forged my own liberty through her lies. As I packed my bags for the new city, I sensed the weight of my journey lifting. Her influence no longer haunted me. She found power in the way I had once needed her, but she never recognized that I would transform her betrayal into strength. There was satisfaction in navigating the liberation I had systematically crafted. A phoenix reborn, lightness riding the edges of my being. In the rearview mirror of my past, the chaos of her unraveling played out like a dissonant symphony I was now free to ignore. She would wander through life, lost in the ruins she had created, all while I remained a ghost in every chapter of her decline. I was no longer just a witness. I was the architect of my own rebirth, collapsing her fortress brick by brick within the silence she misunderstood. I drove away, not with anger, not with sadness, but with an unwavering sense of autonomy. She would piece together the remnants of her disintegrating facade, while I held close the promise of never forgetting and never letting her back in. The silence was my weapon, affecting the fabric of her reality without her even seeing my hand at play. As I entered the new city, I felt the intoxicating pull of liberation, knowing I could build anew, free from the stains of my past. I didn't need her apologies, her regret. This was never about her. It was about reclaiming the power she had taken from me, a quiet victory reverberating in the corners of my mind. I didn't look back. I didn't need to. Alone in my quiet apartment, I felt the weight of the universe shift, a stillness settling into the corners of my empty space. No reminders of her remained, no photographs lingering on shelves, no whispers in the walls. I had meticulously wiped the echoes away, erasing not just her presence, but the very version of myself that once existed in her light. I breathed in the silence, sharp and cleansing, reflecting on the man I had to become to reclaim my life. The betrayal had forged a new identity, one that embraced control over chaos, patience over rage. Each lie she spun, every deceitful act, had fueled my resolve, transforming me from the heartbroken into the architect of her reckoning. The moments I had spent plotting, watching, waiting, those weren't burdens. They were liberating. When I unleashed the storm, it wasn't about anger. It was about balance. I didn't need to scream or curse. I needed to breathe and exist without the haunting shadows of her betrayal. Driving away, I had felt the chains dissolve. Each mile put distance not just between us, but from a life once filled with trust and warmth. The path ahead was unwritten, a canvas sprawling before me, unmarred by memories I no longer needed. In this newfound independence, I discovered the beauty of solitude. I didn't smile, I didn't cry. I simply existed, uninterrupted by the past's weight. There would be no lingering thoughts, no harsh memories clawing at my edges. The promise I made, to forget her hurt, had become my reality, and I was at peace. As I stood there, I understood this was not the aftermath of revenge, but the dawn of a life reclaimed. The quiet surged around me, not as a void, but as an affirmation of my control, my strength blossoming like the calm after a storm. In every breath, in every heartbeat, I felt alive, unshackled, free, and undeniably me.